speed and the load on the engine.
This is where speed changes and direction changes with the propellers taking place.
These levers were used to switch the electricity from the submarine's generators to charge the batteries or to power the main propulsion motors. The submarine's electric motors drove the twin propellers. Electrician's mate O.D. Hawkins.
You have two men that are on the main control cubicle, a port operator and a starboard operator. The signal comes from the bridge on speeds like 1/3 forward, 1/3 reverse, charge the batteries. So we had control of the speed of the engines, how the electricity was taken from the generators either to the batteries or to the main motors.
The submarine was always operated by electrical power. The diesel engine generators powered the motors when the sub was on the surface. It ran on storage battery power when it was submerged.
Being a battery-powered submarine, diesel battery, we had to surface every night and charge batteries.
The fastest the boat could go submerged was about 9 knots, but this would drain the batteries in less than an hour. At slower speeds, she could go farther. Before we move on, look to your left. Behind the narrow door is the tiny office for the electrical officer. Let's move ahead into the after engine room. On either side of this room are 2 of the submarine's 4 main engines. When she was running on the surface, Campanito's maximum speed was 21 knots, or about 24 miles per hour. And when the engines were running, this room was one of the loudest places on the submarine.
Submarines are noisy.
The noise level at that time was so high, you basically couldn't hear anybody talk. We did everything by signals, everything.
The only time the noise stopped is when the engines were shut down. This had to happen in order for the submarine to dive.
The engines we had was probably the best submarine engine anybody could ever build.
Motor machinist Chester Bienkowski.
Fairbanks Morse, 38D 8 and 8. They were 10-cylinder. A post piston, we had 2 crankshafts, one on the upper crank and one on the lower crank, naturally. And the pistons would come together. And the pressure of the air being trapped in there generated so much heat that it ignited the diesel fuel.
At times, that heat also circulated throughout the submarine.
I used to absolutely detest going down on a dive after we'd been running on the surface for 6 or 8 hours with all 4 main engines online.
Radar technician George Moffett.
Because by then the boat was hot, the engines were hot, and with no ventilation, guess where all that engine heat came throughout all the rest of the boat, and it would get hot.
Look toward the middle of the room. You'll see a ladder leading up to a deck access hatch. Just forward of this is another round opening. This is one of the hull valves that supplied the boat's air via the main induction.
The main induction is a monstrous hole way up front of the ship at the bridge that drew in air through a 36-inch valve.
Let's move on. You can see part of the upper crankshaft at the forward end of the starboard engine, through the glass cover. Just before you exit this compartment, look to your right at the space behind the starboard engine. There's a narrow walkway there. Ship's cook, Joe Eigner.
And we stowed food, canned food, outboard of the engines in the engine room.
Step through the doorway into the forward engine room. This is the forward engine room. It housed the other 2 main diesel engines. Chester Bienkowski.
In the engine room, I was an oiler. An oiler is a guy that does all the paperwork, takes all the readings on the engines, checks all the machinery in the oil, runs the purifiers, makes water.
Look against the wall at the far end of the room. You'll see 2 stainless steel barrel-shaped objects, the evaporators. The sub's fresh water had to be made by distilling seawater.
Generally, you made the water when you was on the surface only.
The number one priority for water aboard the boat was always the battery. If there was any left over, we had it for cooking and coffee, and then probably lowest on the list was shower.
We couldn't bathe very often. Water was at a premium. Showers were not frequent. It must have been like 10 days to 2 weeks.
We took no baths, you know.
You used a minimum of water.
No bath. You could get a pail of water, cold water.
The only people on board that bathed more frequently were the motor machinists.
Not according to motor machinist Chester Bienkowski.
You didn't shower all the time. The cooks and bakers, yes, they showered all the time.
If we had the water.
At times we would shower and the water comes out of the air conditioner.
We all we'll smell each other.
When you're ready, step into the next compartment. Look to your left at the crew's washroom and shower.
When we first would depart from port, we would have food stashed all over, and it wasn't unusual to have some in the showers.
Let's move on. Directly below this deck was one of the ship's 2 main storage batteries. This level is the main enlisted men's berthing area. There are 36 bunks in this room.
We had hot bunks. We had more men than we had bunks.
We had 2 bunks for every 3 men. I mean, the third man was always on watch.
Look between the bunks for the small square lockers built into the walls. Not a lot of storage space for 2 months at sea. Sailors would unzip their mattress covers and stow their Navy uniforms inside. They didn't use them much on patrol.
Typically, you wear a t-shirt, shorts, and sandals. It was usually hot aboard the boat. So you dress lightly, and that was it.
At any time of day, you could find men in here sleeping, reading, or writing letters in their bunks. O.D. Hawkins.
Monday, October the 16th, 1944. My dearest Muriel, well, honey, as you can tell by my return address, I've finally gotten on a sub after all of these months, so you can probably imagine how thrilled I was.
Well, hon, I came home to find 2 letters from you, and I shall sort of answer them both. Mainly, I guess, because I'm not full of any...
If you shouldn't hear from me for a month or so at a time, which is possible, don't worry about it. I like to think no news is good news.
These envelopes all have a censored marking on them, so he was very careful of what he had to say. The expression used during that time was loose lips sink ships.
Look up at the forward end of the room for the ship's medical locker. It has a red cross on it. Pampanito carried no doctor. The pharmacist's mate took care of the crew's health. Let's move on to the crew's mess.
My name is Joseph Eichner, and I was one of the cooks aboard the submarine. I worked from, let's say, from 5:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night.
Well into the night, the baker, he would bake all cakes and cookies and rolls and that sort of thing.
They say a submariner ate better than anybody in the Navy.
Just forward of the tables is the galley, or kitchen. This is where all the food was prepared.
Breakfast is French toast or fried eggs and bacon or sausages. And then noon meal, we'd have pork chops or ham or chicken or steak. We usually had French fries. And when you fed the whole crew, 85 men, you had to peel a lot of potatoes. The crew that was going to relieve the watch that was on ate first. And then when they finished, the crew that came off ate. 24 hours a day we had coffee.
Notice the checker and AC-doocy boards on the tables. The crew's mess was really the only recreational area on the boat for enlisted men.
We had records that we played, records and the radio. That's all you had. Blue Rain. I don't know how many times I played that song. Blue Rain, falling down on my window pane.
Blue rain, falling down on my window
showed movies, and we'd only have a few movies, and we'd probably show them quite a few times.
And cards, play cards. Oh, I remember listening to Tokyo Rose, yes.
With a grain of salt.
Well, she was telling us submarine sailors that so-and-so was sunk and we're going to be getting you, you know.
You'd listen to anything that you could to get news, I mean, of how the war was going.
Find the grate between the dining tables. Look in if you can.
We only had a small ice box and a small refrigerator. It was underneath. There was a trap door there, and you had the freezer in there too.
Let's move on. Just before you pass through the doorway that exits this room, take a look into the galley.
If you stood right outside of the galley and the storage room was right underneath it, below the deck, the shelves were full and the whole well was full, all the way up to the top.
Step into the control room. Look to your left into the radio room. The device that looks like a typewriter is actually the top secret coding machine, the ECM Mark II. It was used to encode